In this lesson, we will be covering the workflow process to create an illustration from start to finish. Since we are at the start of creating illustrations, and now that we have learned how to use all of the various tools in our software, we will be creating an illustration using reference images. This is a great way to start learning how to do illustrations, to try out different drawing styles, and to have a base to go off of. So first off, we need to decide what style of illustration we want to do and what we want to represent. In this case, I want to illustrate a cartoon style scene that represents, in a very abstract way, space. So I will be needing reference pictures of planets, for example. I also want to add in an astronaut. So the first step will be doing a Google research for reference images. So doing a Google research, here I have typed in cartoon planets very easily and clicked on images. Here we can scroll and decide which style we like the most and which would be nice for our illustration. And also, since we are doing an illustration for the first time, we want to find images that are easy to reproduce or to trace. So we can scroll through all of these images, choose one that we like the most, and save it to a folder. Next, we will be searching a reference image for an astronaut. So for example, here we can type in astronaut. And again, we can scroll and decide which style we like the most. In my case, I like this style of illustration a lot. I think it is simple and clean and easy to reproduce, but I also want my astronaut to be in a sitting position. So I will continue scrolling and find a reference image like this one, for example, where the astronaut is sitting down. This way I can take his sitting position as a reference, but also use this image as a style reference. So I will be saving both into my folder and then importing them into our software. Now that we have saved our reference images, it's time to import them inside of our document. Now, with the software Krita, we can't just drag and drop an image. What we need to do, first of all, is go on our toolbar here on the left, scroll down and click on our Reference Images tool. Once we click on this, we will go to the right and click on Tool Options. You may notice that here we have various options. So what we are going to do is click on our plus icon and we will open the folder where we saved our reference images. So first of all, I am going to import the planets that I decided to use as reference. So you click on them and you open, and you will notice that right away the reference image has landed on top of our page. So what we are going to do is click on it and drag. And we are able to do this only when our reference image tool is selected. So we can decide where to move it. And in my case, since I only want to use this as a reference so that I can go and look at it every so often, I want it on the side of my page. You may notice also that there are different points here around our image that are very useful for enlarging or making our image smaller. And also you may notice that the ratio is the same when we are enlarging our image. This is because Keep Aspect Ratio is selected here. If we were to deselect it and try and enlarge or make the image smaller, you will notice that the ratio isn't kept the same. So what we are going to do is click Ctrl Z to go back and keep Aspect Ratio selected. So now we can change the size, make it a bit smaller, and leave it here on the side. To confirm the position, all we need to do is click anywhere on the screen. Now we are going to insert our reference images for our astronaut. So again, with the image reference tool selected, we are going to go into our tool options and select the plus icon. And now we are going to insert the reference images of our astronaut. So this is the style that I want to replicate. So we are going to make it a little bit bigger and move it here to the top. We can change the size and then click anywhere on the screen. And we are also going to insert the astronaut that is sitting down and also drag it here up to the top. Make it a little bit bigger so that it is easier to see. When we select one of our reference images, you may notice that also here under tool options, we have an opacity and a saturation option. These are also very useful if we want to actually trace one of our images. So for example, if I were to take this and drag it inside our page, I could drag the opacity to the left, and this way I will be able to create a new layer and start drawing over this image to replicate it more accurately. And I can also bring the saturation down, because if you're just replicating the image, you really don't need colors in that moment. All you need are the shapes and the outlines. But in our case, we aren't going to trace the image. We are just going to take inspiration from the position so we can leave it on top here. Click anywhere on the screen to save it. And now we have our reference images imported in our page. The next step we are going to do is creating a rough sketch of what our image is going to be. So we are going to start sketching out the general shape, where we will want our various elements positioned, and just sketch out more or less what parts of this page we are going to be drawing onto. So we already have a new layer selected, our paint layer here, and we are going to select our freehand brush tool. And in our brush presets, we are going to choose a brush that will be useful for sketching. So this one, for example, the pencil 1 sketch will be perfect for sketching, and start sketching on our page roughly how we want our image to look like. So what I want to represent is, as I mentioned before, a space scene. But since I want it to be abstract, I want to create a sort of three-dimensional image with various layers on top. So let's just check that the size of our brush is good. You can also choose a color here. Let's make it black so that it is easier to view, and we can make it a little bit smaller like this. I'm going to start by deciding where I want my astronaut to be. So I know that I want him on the right side of the page, and I know that I'm going to want him sitting on a planet. So first of all, I can start sketching out very roughly the size of the planet. I can decide to move it a bit lower down by selecting our Move Layer tool in our toolbar. And I can move it around here and then go back to my freehand brush tool. And then I am going to roughly decide the size of the astronaut on top. So I like to do this by first creating a very rough image just to decide the amount of space that the astronaut is going to occupy. So for example, I know that I don't want him to be bigger than this circle that I drew right here. By looking at our reference images, we can see that the head is larger than the rest of the body. So we know that we can create a bigger circle up here. And we know that the rest of the body is going to be a little bit smaller. So since we want him to be sitting down, he will be occupying this type of space. So again, this stage of the workflow is all about just choosing how much space you're going to be occupying on the page, and very rough sketch. So you just go ahead and continue sketching and deciding how much space you want to occupy. I also like the idea that our astronaut is fishing in space and he's fishing a star. So we are going to also decide more or less where the fishing rod will be. So maybe here, and then maybe like this. So once we have this part, again, we can use our Move Layer tool and move our illustration around, decide more specifically where we want it to be. So we can move it a little bit more to the right or a little bit more to the center. And remember, when we're in this stage, we can always go back and change things around. It doesn't have to be perfect right now. So while we're here, I'm going to create another rough sketch of the layers. So maybe something like this. And I'm going to position my planets in these layers slowly. So it's going to be, again, very rough sketch. And the last layer. So then we're going to decide very roughly where to position some of the planets. So we know that our astronaut is going to be fishing a star. So the star will probably be here. We might position one of the planets in this area. Might make a bigger one over here. Maybe one that is peeping out of this layer. Another one here. So we have a few different planets and we have a star here in the middle. So if we kind of like the general position of everything, we can also go here on our layer panel and bring the opacity down. And then we can start drawing more specific shapes. So we can start off by creating a new layer. And for example, we can start creating more precise circles for our planets. So we can do that now by creating filled in circles where our planets are going to be. Don't worry about the color right now. We can choose momentary colors, take inspiration from the colors that are on our reference images, because we can always go back and change them. But to make things very clean and very organized, we are going to create circles on separate layers to keep everything organized. So let's start off by creating a new layer. We can call this one Planet 1. And it will be the one underneath our astronaut. So let's quickly choose a simple color like this one. Select our ellipse tool and go into tool options and make sure that under fill, foreground color is selected. Then we can start dragging out our circle. Select shift to make it a perfect circle. And with our alt key selected contemporarily, we can move this around. So this seems to be a pretty good position, and we can release like so. And we can do this for each planet. So create a new layer. We can also start to decide which planets we will start drawing. So the one underneath the astronaut, for example, can be Saturn. Again, we can change our mind later. This is just for now to have a clear idea of what we're doing. Our second planet we will put here, and it can be Earth. And let's select a color similar to one of these. So a shade of blue, like so. Drag out our circle, select shift, and with alt move it where we want it, here. Then create a new layer. Let's decide what this one can be. It could be Uranus. So rename it Uranus. Choose a different color like so. And again, start dragging our circle, select shift, alt to move it, and this feels like a good position. New layer. We can make this one Venus, for example. Start dragging, select shift, and then alt. And then the last planet can be the sun. So now that we have our various planets drawn out, we can put them all into a group so that we can hide the group and make it reappear whenever we want. This way we don't have too many layers in our layer panel. So let's select each planet, right click anywhere, scroll down to group, select quick group, and let's rename this planets. Now we can hide the planets here and move the layer where we had the sketch on top. Let's also rename this layer sketch. And you may notice now that we have moved the sketch layer on top of the planets. Maybe you want them a little bit smaller, or maybe you want them a little bit bigger. So if we want to change the size of these very quickly, we can very easily use our selection tools. So for example, maybe I want the sun to be smaller. I can take the elliptical selection tool here, drag a circle on top, again, click shift to make it smaller and alt to move it where I want it. So let's say I want it this big, release. And now we go to our select drop-down menu, select invert selection. And when we take our freehand brush tool, we can select the eraser, make it a little bit bigger, and cancel out the parts that we don't want, like so. Then Control Alt A, deselect. And now we have a nicer idea of the planets. So let's close up the group for now. And let's create a new layer underneath our planets. And let's start coloring in these sections also. So since I want these to be very clean, simple curves, I am going to select the freehand path tool, and I will be drawing these in sections, always on separate layers. So I'm going to be making different planes. Let's call them like this. Again, make sure in tool options that the fill option is foreground color, and we can start drawing. You may notice that some parts are nicer than others. So either we can go in with our eraser tool or even just our path tool and fix it up, or you can draw it again. In this case, I am just going to use the eraser tool and just clean it up a little bit. Okay, and now we can do another layer. So select new layer, make sure that it is underneath, select our freehand path tool and select a different color. Then new layer and move it underneath again, choose a different color. And then we have the last layer, move it to the bottom. And this one we can just make a very simple shape like so, because it will be underneath so we don't see it. So first of all, let's rename these layers. We will make the darkest one the first layer. So let's call it layer 1 and then rename the ones on top. Also in this case, we can select all of these, right click and create a group. And let's just call this group layers. Now that we have done this, since I said that I want these planets to appear between the layers, we can go and modify them again very easily using our selection tools. We can start with Earth here at the bottom. And what we are going to do is select the layer. We can take our contiguous selection tool, select this layer, and then we select the layer where our planet is on, Earth, and with our eraser tool we can really easily cancel out the part that we don't want. Since it's the exact same layer, we can also cancel out this part, but first we need to select the planet, so Venus, and cancel out the part that we don't need. And then we are going to do the same with our sun. But in this case, we need to select a different layer. We need to select the first one. So Control Alt A to deselect the current layer. Let's retake our contiguous selection tool. Perfect. And select the last layer. And then select the sun layer. Reselect our freehand brush tool, our eraser, and cancel out what we don't need. So we can start sketching in a slightly more precise way our astronaut. So we are going to do this again by creating a new layer. So we will use our brush tool and select the style of brush that we need. This basic one should be perfect. And we will choose for now a tone of gray. So we can zoom in. We can also check out our astronaut a little bit better. Again, if you want, you can drag in the illustration, the reference image inside your page simply by selecting your image reference tool. You can select the image, drag it in, and trace on top of it if you need to. First of all, we could actually draw his helmet. As we saw here, it is just a circle, so we can start off by doing that. So let's drag it out, click Shift, like so. That feels pretty good. And now we can continue drawing. For safety, let's create a new layer again, and maybe let's rename this helmet so that we know that that's there. So on the new layer, we can start drawing the body with our freehand brush tool selected. Make sure that it's the same size as the circle that we created so that it is more cohesive. And let's start drawing. So don't worry about this being perfect. You can try as many times as you want until you find a shape that you like. Okay, so now we have a pretty decent outline of what we want our astronaut to be. We can add some more details like the belt that we saw in the reference image, like this one. And let's see if there are any more details. And now we have a pretty good idea of what the shape of our astronaut will be. We can hide the sketch and see what it's starting to look like. We can start adding details to his helmet. So let's do that on the helmet layer. And now we can go and clean it up a little bit with our eraser tool. So now we can also rename this layer body outline and rename this one helmet outline, so that then when we color in, we know how to distinguish it. So if now we cancel our sketch layer, we will have a pretty good idea of everything that we are doing. We can also add his fishing rod while we're at it, and let's make that in another layer. We can cancel out again the lines that won't be visible. So where the hand is, for example, we can cancel the rod and maybe like this. So now we have a pretty good idea, and we can color in the base of our astronaut. This way we'll know exactly each part in our page that will be colored and where we will need to add details in the next lesson. So let's create another layer right underneath the ones that we were working on, and we can start coloring in our astronaut. And we can also create another layer right below this one and color in the visor of his suit. We can also use our sample color tool and pick out this color because it is a nice shade of blue purple. And we can use that to color in the visor. And let's rename these layers also. We can call this one visor, and we can call this one suit color. And this will be the fishing rod. Now we can also select all of these, right click, group, quick group, and rename the group astronaut and close it up. So now you can see that we have a very clear positioning of all of our elements. We know exactly the parts of our page that we are occupying. We obviously can go in and modify things later, and thanks to all of the different layers that we have created, it will be very easy to do that without wasting time, without touching any other part of our illustration. Everything is very clean and organized. So we can end this lesson here. In the next lesson, we will be talking about shading, adding details, using our mask layers, so the alpha lock, to add very easy details and make everything more three-dimensional. Just all the finishing touches to make the illustration more definitive and nicer. So if you have enjoyed this lesson, make sure to leave a like. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can leave them in our comment box. And if you want to give our page some support, make sure to subscribe and stay updated on all our courses and all our new lessons. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for following along.